Bitcoin is testing its lower trend line at the moment, and we might see Bitcoin have a bit of a break to the upside if we can get a close position above the previous swing high at $44,729. In today's video, guys, I'm going to be discussing Bitcoin's technical analysis on the 1 hour, 1 day, and 1 week's time frames, sharing my thoughts and opinions on where I think Bitcoin is heading. Let's roll that intro and get right down into it. Okay, guys, so here we have Bitcoin paired up with USDT using the 1 hour Binance chart. As you can kind of see, we're testing this trend line at the moment and we're really struggling to get past it. But if we can, when we have a good strong chance of a double top or even potentially a breakout above this previous swing high, as I said earlier, at $44,729. If we can do that, then we can definitely say that we've broken out of this trend line. Now, from an Elliott wave theory point of view, the structure here that could potentially unfold is a rally up into a new yearly high. Okay, this structure would basically be looking for Bitcoin's price action to move up towards more 46,600 to 47,600. Okay, so that's going to be the kind of the range where we would see that potential breakout. And it would look something like this, right? Just this ABC structure. Okay, so we obviously have to see a few things happen here before we can potentially see a breakout like that. We'd have to basically get above 44,729, as you can kind of see on the chart there. And then, of course, the next previous swing high, which will be heavy resistance at 45,500. And then, of course, the previous swing high or yearly high, 45,879. There's a lot of resistance up in this higher range with lots of selling pressure. Now, we can obviously see good potential runs here if we do see, Bitcoin spot ETF approvals next week. We might even see a little bit of a run today, being Sunday, and there's the weekly close position to be considered. So there's a lot of going on right here. Now, if we cannot do these things and we cannot rally above, then we'll have to assume that actually a new local low is more than likely going to unfold. Okay, and the reason for that is you would have this as a corrective pattern here, with this just being your swing high on the B wave, for example, and then coming down. So 44,729 would be your B wave high, and then you'd move on down. And that low would basically be a new yearly low. It would be a new yearly low because we are in a new year. It would be heading down more towards 39,727 to 38,631 right down in here. And obviously that's going to lose the support area that we had previously around $40,000, right? And so if you lose $40,000, we could see major slippage to the downside even further. And I've spoken about this quite a few times on the daily charts and obviously on the walk and talk videos, where I'm sharing my thoughts and opinions on what I think is going to unfold from the Bitcoin spot ETFs. So it's kind of all to play for right now. At the moment, we can see here as well, we've got the support of the 50 EMA. Okay, that's coming in at 43,857 with the 50 SMA at 43,835, both being support at the moment, but that resistance is true. You can also see that the stochastic RSI is lifting up towards the overbought area quite rapidly, meaning that we haven't got a lot more momentum left of this move to the upside, and we're probably going to start to see reversals at some point later today. Now, if I take the stochastic RSI off and throw it on the divergence indicator, you can see the RSI is lifted up quite a bit as well, but we do not see any divergences between the RSI and price action or anything like that. We can, of course, take a look at the volume profiles, and the volume profiles are shrinking here as prices moved up. Let me show you that on this scale here. So as you can kind of see, we've had this move to the upside here, and whilst that's happened, volumes have decreased over here. Okay, so it shows that there's actually weakness to this move to the upside. That's also indicated in the stochastic RSI. So ultimately, I don't think we've got terribly too much. You can see that at the moment we're really struggling on this trend line being resistance. And so our chances are here that we are likely to get rejected. But we'll see how this goes, if the bulls are able to rally through, or maybe we'll just see some high volume just spike us up out of here. Could be what is needed to break out of that bearish particular pattern. Let's roll this up into the daily time frame. The daily time frame, of course, is giving us the idea that we are still stuck inside this range. Now, we do have the higher highs and the higher lows, with support being found on that 50 EMA. That's 41,252 at the moment. Okay, and of course, the 50 SMA is right next to that at 41,520 as well. So we do know that there's support to be found on that lower side of the trend line. And if we were to lose this support, we are going to be moving down more to the next area at $39,600 to $40,000. This is an area that we've spoken about many times before, and something that I do think is likely to unfold. Okay, this is going to be the last hope that the bulls have of trying to keep Bitcoin above that $40,000. We could wick down to 39,600, but ultimately a closure below 40,000 is going to give the bears a bit more control over the market. And if we are to see that, and we are to see that negativity in the price action, the main area of focus on the chart once we kind of get past 40K is going to be $35,000 to $38,000. And of course, you have that 200 EMA not far below there at 34,118. My main focus, though, I think for Bitcoin is to find support down here at $30,000. $30,000 was a previous area of resistance we actually saw a couple of different times. We've broken through it, but we've never come back down to retest it. So I'm hopeful that maybe this is where Bitcoin really does find its support and really can rally from. I think there's some support to be found, of course, at 40,000, and there's support to be found down here at the 35,000. But ultimately, with the previous resistance down here and a breakthrough, a very clean breakthrough of this area, but no retest, tells me that this is a good area to find good retesting and good support for Bitcoin. So if we are to see a good, healthy correction in Bitcoin, which I think is due, and we are talking, a good 30%, that's going to get us right down into this previous area of resistance, and we can turn that into support. That's basically going to be $30,000 to $32,000, somewhere in that range. So I think that's really where Bitcoin's daily chart is going to be heading. The stochastic RSI is at the mid-level at the moment. It can go in either direction here. It hasn't decided which way this is going to go just yet. We can rally on up a little bit further. As I said, we have those almost bullish scenarios on the hourly chart that can be supported by the daily, right? We can see those runs to the upside if we needed them. But ultimately, if the price action does decide it wants to start to see a cooling off period, then we also have momentum to support that on the daily chart. It's quite inconclusive. If we take the stochastics off and we throw on the divergence indicator, you can see that there was bearish divergence on the 2nd of January. And from here, we have obviously had that move to the downside. Ultimately, we can see here as well that there isn't anything else going on most recently. If we come back into here, we can see that on the 2nd of January, we had the high, we came down to the low, we had the bearish divergence, but we haven't got anything else on the divergence indicator at the moment. So the daily chart is quite inconclusive. It can go in either direction. The RSI is about midway. It's actually above the midline, so you could argue it's actually bullish to a degree. We have obviously the stochastic RSI that's also at the mid levels, which can go in either direction. Volume profiles are quite interesting though. Ultimately, as we had the new higher highs, we have set lower highs in terms of volume. There we do have divergence. This divergence is going to be the interesting one where we see potentially weakness to the moves to the upside, and actually is going to see more of a selling off occurring over time. So from a volume point of view, I would say actually we're probably more bearish than we are bullish, but I think we can still get a little bit more of a push to the upside should the market decide that is what is going on. So we have to be right mindful here, if we're going to be trading Bitcoin, that there's still possibilities that we have new yearly highs before we actually have that correction to an inevitable 30% correction, I believe anyway, towards $30,000, right? So moving up into the weekly time frame, we obviously have got all of the previous sell on the news events. We kind of went through this previously in a couple of different videos. And obviously the Bitcoin spot ETFs are the next major event, right? We have these key dates in mind, and I think the market is going to react negatively regardless of what the news is. And this is simply because every time that there has been a date where we have a categorical date for a bit of fundamental news, whether that's Coinbase IPO or futures ETF, we often basically just gear up to sell that news, regardless of what it might be. And so there's a lot of hope that maybe this time is different for Bitcoin spot ETFs. Ultimately, I'm not a believer in that. I think people's behaviors generally do not change. Candlestick patterns sure do, but for the most part, I'm not going to be expecting people's behaviors to change here. A lot of hype on the build up to the Bitcoin spot ETFs, lots of profit has been made, and my expectations are that that profit gets taken off the table on the Bitcoin spot ETF news. This could also be compounded by the Fed interest rates. If they do start to drop their interest rates over in the US, then we're going to see also more selling pressure. Even though that this is a positive move and would encourage more money to flow to risk or riskier assets such as cryptocurrency, I would expect that actually the Fed pivot or the reduction of interest rates over in the US will only happen when the US economy is at its worst, i.e. most of the liquidity has been sucked up, and basically people are going to be selling their assets off in order to sustain their lifestyles. If we have a Bitcoin spot ETF coinciding with a Fed pivot, we may be in a kind of perfect storm scenario to see a very nice correction to the downside for Bitcoin, gearing us up ready for those next parabolic moves. Failure to do this, I think, is actually worse for Bitcoin. I think this is a very healthy thing that needs to happen. If we cannot have this move right away, we're basically just going to stunt the growth of Bitcoin on the longer term. And the reason for this is that we're already heavily overbought on RSIs and stochastic RSIs at that macro level, the monthly time frame, the weekly time frame, right? We need to see these things get corrected in order for us to continue our momentum and our movements to the upside. Failure to do this is basically going to prevent us from actually having a really strong rally and potentially do even more damage later. So I know we want to be bullish and I know we want to see lots of green in the market. Ultimately, though, there's actually a time and a place for these things. And for now, actually the time and the place is for the bears to actually take some of the profit off the table and bring the price back to a more reasonable area, around $30,000 in my humble opinion. If we can't keep 30,000, then we are going to have to go down more towards 25. But, I think for now, let's focus on 30K and see how price reacts. I think we have a pretty decent corrective move there underway for Bitcoin towards $30,000. This would be a 30% correction on Bitcoin spot ETF news, which would be very small in comparison to the Coinbase IPO or the futures ETF or even the CME news that we had way back in 2017, right? So I think for the most part, if we see a 30% correction, it's really quite small in comparison to all of the other sell the news events. If we were to come down more 40-50%, then we are going to be more in line with Coinbase and we are going to be looking more towards $25,000-$20,000 Bitcoin, which will be a lot more painful in the market, in my humble opinion. So if we do see delays with Bitcoin spot ETFs from the SEC, I think we're going to see potentially a lot more damage further down the line, as in we can continue growing, maybe we hit 50K, and then from that higher range, we see a Bitcoin spot ETFs approved whilst a Fed is pivoting, and we could see more damage happening here for Bitcoin. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. And if you are interested in 4 reasons why I think Bitcoin is going to perform very well this year, then you should probably check out this video right here.